Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Over the course of the last year on this channel, we have taken in-depth looks at the history of a variety of the greatest beat-em-ups of all time. We have focused on all-time great series, such as Streets of Rage, Double Dragon, Golden Axe, Final Fight, just to name a few. There are so many fantastic classic games from this quirky genre. Today though, we are going to be focusing in on one of the quirkiest beat-em-ups of them all, which is a game that in my opinion is amongst the most underrated of its era. In this content we are going to take a deep dive look at the bright colourful brawler that perhaps holds the accolade for having the greatest name in all of gaming's history. This mental game truly is special, even though it certainly has never got the attention it deserves. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Ninja Baseball Batman, the best named game ever. Yeah! Today's story starts with an American gentleman named Drew Maniscalco. In the late 1980s, Drew was working with a former Atari executive known as Frank Balaus at a company known as Fabtech. Fabtech specialised in acquiring the licenses to Japanese arcade games, then distributing them elsewhere. They would distribute many units, with games such as Toki and Cabal being some of the more notable games that they dealt with. After a number of successful dealings working with Japanese companies, Fabtech would choose to approach Irem next, the arcade juggernaut behind the likes of the R-Type series. After some positive discussions, Irem president of the day Yuki Takashima would reveal to Fabtech boss Frank Balaus that Irem were keen to open a US office and wanted recommendations on who would be good people to run the business on Irem's behalf. So without hesitation, Frank would volunteer himself, along with his co-worker Drew Maniscalco. The deal was done, so in 1990 Irem America in Redmond, Washington was officially born. During this time frame, Frank would continue to run both Fabtech and the newly established Irem America. As for Drew, his focus within would be managing coin-operated game sales for both corporate companies. During Drew's tenure at Irem, he would regularly try and keep up with popular culture, which would obviously result in him noticing how bloody successful the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had become. Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello and Rembrandt were printing money and had successful comics, a television show, video games and even a movie. Speaking of movies, another franchise that caught Drew's eye was Batman, with the recent Hollywood movies breathing all new life into the brand. 1989's Batman and 1992's Batman Returns were huge hits. In fact, I used to love this era of Batman so much as a child that I once went to Blockbuster and asked if I could rent Batman Forever, but sadly they said I had to give it back. The existence of both of these intellectual properties fed into Drew's inspiration for his own franchise. However, more brainstorming would take place before he came up with a project. Drew felt that his heroes should have memorable weapons to help make them stand out more, so would take influence from the 1973 movie Walking Tall, where the star utilises a baseball bat as a weapon. This made sense to him on so many different levels, as apart from Drew being a big baseball fan himself, and the fact that a baseball bat is a mean weapon to begin with, the sport of baseball is an extremely popular pastime in both Japan and the USA, the two main markets that Irem were trying to target. So by combining the Ninja Turtles, Batman and baseball together, Drew came up with the hilarious yet perfect name of Ninja Baseball Batman, and thus the concept was born. As ideas were further refined, characters would be designed wearing baseball uniforms, along with a number of comical enemies, all of which related to the sport. Drew Maniscalco would submit his sketches to Irem of Japan, and to his delight, they loved them. Next, they would ask him to develop a story for the game, so he would develop a plot in which a criminal breaks into the Baseball Hall of Fame and steals 7 valuable artifacts. The Commissioner of Baseball hires the Ninja Baseball Batman to get them back, which the heroes must do so by completing several levels and repossessing the stolen items. In terms of gameplay, Maniscalco loved the idea of his characters potentially starring in a side-scrolling platformer, similar to the likes of Super Mario Bros., one of his favourite games of all time. Irem of Japan though decided it would be best to make the title a 4-player beat-em-up. due to the obvious fact that it is a lot easier to make money from an arcade game that 4 people can experience simultaneously than it was with a single or 2-player affair. 4-player co-op games just made more economical sense, so an arcade brawler was the way forward. When it comes to the 4 playable characters found in Ninja Baseball Batman, Drew initially wanted to name them after legendary sportsmen such as Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays, but instead decided against it in the fear that children would not know who they were, so instead named the players Rhino, Jose, Roger and Straw, paying homage to modern baseball players of the era. Ryan Soundsberg, Jose Canseco, Roger Clemens and Darryl Strawberry were all the players they were named after. In terms of the rest of the game's development, including the actual programming, this was all performed by Irem of Japan. The artwork that Maniscalco had previously sent to them had been drawn by American artists. However, the Japanese staff would choose to redesign all the characters in a more anime art style. During this Japanification of the characters, you can also see that a lot of influence in design of them seems to have been taken from Super Sentai, a concept that would later be repackaged as the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in the West. In further regards to the Japanese changes, the game would be released as Yakyu Kakuto Rigumanu in Japan, but I'm obviously definitely not getting that title right. Anyway, this title referenced numerous tokusatsu television shows, most notably the Super Sentai series itself. Although Drew was happy and accepting of these changes, the project had drifted somewhat away from his original ideas. But we will touch more on the effects of these changes later on in the video. In terms of the gameplay that can be found in this gem, as stated earlier, the title functions as a 4-player beat-em-up. However, mechanically, much of the action found in this game is modelled off of one of their previous releases known as Undercover Cops. This means that characters have the ability to perform different fighting moves via the use of an 8-way joystick, combined with attack and jump buttons. The controls are easy and intuitive, allowing for combos, throws and dash attacks. When a player's life is low, additional desperation moves can be performed too, in one last ditch attempt to survive. Obviously, like many games of this ilk, there are items scattered throughout the title, such as restorative health items and additional weapons. Basically, the usual tropes. There are also items that can summon cheerleaders who can destroy all enemies on the screen or drop additional items. In terms of the game's graphics, Ninja Baseball Batman is a game that appears colourful, vivid and very distinctively Japanese looking. The art style kind of has a Samurai Pizza Cats vibe to it, mixed with a bit of SD Gundam. The first stage takes place at an airport in Seattle, and the baseball themed enemies we touched on earlier quickly start appearing. After some brawling at ground level, action soon shifts aboard a moving aircraft, with some nice background scrolling to set the scene. This is where the first boss fight takes place against Windy Plane, a cartoonish anthropomorphic plane. Stage 2 takes place in San Francisco, on what appears to be the Golden Gate Bridge. Big red bridges are a classic beat-em-up trope after all. Gameplay is mixed up somewhat as players begin the stage in moving cars. As usual, there are a lot of interesting enemies to see, some of which require shaking off with a joystick. At some point in the stage, players drop to the cruise ship below to continue the brawl, where more cars can be picked up to clean house with. Action then moves to a portside where players take on Mad Lax, or is that meant to be Mad LAX? I'm not sure if this is just a reference to Mad Max or whether it's trying to somehow reference Los Angeles International Airport. If so, I am confused why this would be the case, considering Los Angeles and San Francisco are opposite sides of the state. What do you lot think? Stage 3 brings us to Vegas, so everything begins to look a bit more Streets of Ragey, which is certainly not something to complain about. There are a lot of gambling inspired enemies here, such as playing cards wearing top hats for example, and other bizarre yokai looking creatures. This version of Vegas certainly looks way more Japanese than the times I have visited Vegas in real life. The dangers of gambling though are brought to life in this game, as the final boss of the area is an angry fruit machine that, due to luck elements, spawns objects that either help or hinder the players. Stage 4 brings us to Texas, which as you can guess has been depicted like the Wild West by the Eastern Development team. Well, Wild West mixed with haunted house elements, as I guess that period of history occurred a fair amount of time ago now. Despite having a spooky theme, all the action remains as cartoony as ever. The boss fight of the stage takes place against an opponent known as Ghost Buffalo, which innovatively seems to be made up of household objects being brought together and controlled by a poltergeist. We are then brought to the swampy Everglades of Florida before brawls progress into a factory setting with a conveyor belt in the background. Once again, some of the stage elements ruin the setting a bit, as the products being produced in the background look distinctly Japanese, rather than being anything you would find in America. I would have thought America probably doesn't even have many factories like this, as they rely mostly on China for trade. The stage is balmy, but I guess the factory setting is a trope that should be included. The stage concludes with a fight with a mechanical alligator. With regards to an alligator themed boss though, I guess at least the Japanese got that part right about Florida, as this is the only place I have been on Earth where you regularly see these hideous creatures just walking the streets. In fact, Florida was full of disgusting large mammals too, but then again I did see a lot of McDonald's around. Stage 6 takes place in Chicago, and the stage area seems to be inspired by the early 20th century mobster wars. There are Uzi-wielding foe aplenty to take out in this cityscape. Down at the bottom of a wine cellar, you get to take on a mob boss, who is simply known as the makeshift villain. The final stage takes place in the most typical beat-em-up looking stage we have seen yet, but at the very least it looks very beautiful. These night city stages always look great. Action eventually ends up on a baseball pitch for the first time, which is the perfect location for the final throws of the game. You know, throws like you throw a baseball. See what I did there? On this last stage, for some reason we take on the Windy Plain once again before taking on the King Babe, a last boss with a name clearly inspired by Babe Ruth. I am an Englishman and from a continent who could not give a crap about baseball, but even I know who he is. After this long fight, the Ninja Baseball Batman hits the evil baseball commissioner King Babe to the moon, bringing this quirky title to a close. As you would have seen from everything we have just looked at today so far, Ninja Baseball Batman was an extremely unique game in concept, presentation and art style. If this is a game you have seen before, it is certainly not one you will ever forget. But how did this game perform when it was released back in 1993? Let's discuss. According to the man behind the original Ninja Baseball Batman idea, Drew Maniscalco, the game struck out stateside, with them only managing to shift 43 arcade units across the huge country. The units however sold over 10 times the amount in Japan, despite the population being much lower over there, with an additional 510 units being sold in other parts of Asia. So Asia had more than 1,000 Ninja Baseball Batman cabinets knocking about. With regards to these contrasting sales results, as an outsider looking in, it's easy to blame the game's art style with regards to its western failings. After all, the anime art style had not gone mainstream in the USA yet, and the popularity of Pokemon was still quite a few years away. A game that took more of its art direction from American comic books, and more specifically the likes of the Ninja Turtles and Batman like originally intended, probably would have given the game more of a marketing edge, rather than this complete chibi fest. Speaking of the art direction, Drew feels that the game's commercial failings in general were due to a lack of direction. Around the time of Ninja Baseball Batman's release, Irem had become a Nintendo licensee, so would pump the majority of their resources into marketing and creating games for the popular Super Nintendo home console, resulting in the coin-op division of the company being reduced to no more than an afterthought. In fact, due to this reason, Drew would end up parting ways with the company at the end of 1992, prior to the game even being released. Despite the brainchild of the game no longer being with the company, when the game hit arcades, he states that before he left Irem of America, he left behind all the marketing plans which he feels could have been used to make the game a bigger success. This included a beautiful full cabinet art package, a great sales brochure, promo items, you name it. When it came to the launch though, Drew was disappointed with what Irem decided to do. When he finally got to experience the game for himself at the trade show, he was sad to see that his gorgeous art package for the cabinet was not present, and instead it was replaced by a boring, generic Irem cab. He said it looked terrible. In regards to the game itself, he complains that the attract mode storyline went by so quickly that no one could read it. Players had no idea what the mission was. It was a textbook example of no one really caring about the important details. To dig the knife even deeper in the wound, Irem would not even bother including Drew's name in the game's credits either. Much of his work seemed to have gone to waste. Whilst there was clearly a lot of failings on the marketing front, when it comes to the gameplay though, Drew states that he thinks the game is a lot of fun, and that the programmers involved did a fantastic job. He also voiced his pleasure for the amount of positive retrospective reviews the game has received in recent years, and adores the fact that so many people make the effort to go back and play the game using MAME today. He thinks it's fantastic that people can now easily enjoy these games at home for free. Now 27 years removed from the release of this game, Irem Japan still holds exclusive rights to the Ninja Baseball Batman video game. But rather interestingly, Drew actually owns the rights to the name and characters of themselves. In fact, he even has a website up dedicated to the legacy of the brand, where tons of information surrounding the IP can be accessed. The fact that this page exists is physical proof of Drew's passion for this project, and is a great way of documenting the love that went into the Ninja Baseball Batman's creation. Despite the game certainly having a decent sized audience today, I still personally think the game deserves to be even more appreciated. The game is an undersung arcade great, so I enjoyed shining more of a spotlight on it on here. I can't think of any games with a name quite as good as this either. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Ninja Baseball Batman. Let me know down below if you have played this game and what you thought of it. How do you think this game could have found more popularity in 1993? If you enjoyed today's content, why not check out my Beat 'em Ups playlist? I have taken deep dive looks at 37 other games in this genre, which you can now go back and enjoy. As always, if you are here for the first time, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell, as all of those things really help me when you do that. I would also like to thank my Patreon backers and those people who have hit the join button, as your additional support allows me to create content on a full-time basis. I will never stop being busy on here all the time you lot are around. Huge, tremendous thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Razmek, Luke Samuel Denton, Corey I. Marsh Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinch, Evan Border, Philip Mamph, Crambo Rambo 82, Azrael Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angelite 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, SpongeMat B, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang He, Ben Slightly, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Vlaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yarl, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Me Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, RetroReversing.com, Casey Wright, Since Spaces is I, Andrew Bazansky, Gunther Hendricks, and everyone else who backs me on this fine platform. Thank you so much for allowing me to do what I do. I love it. Yeah, cheerio.